Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Tonight, I would like to take you into a corner of our modern world where technology and mystery quietly overlap. It is a place we rarely talk about out loud, yet many people have brushed up against it in moments of grief, confusion, or curiosity. Before we begin, settle in, get comfortable, and let your mind soften, because today's story drifts between the known and the unknown. Every so often, someone reports receiving a call from a number that should no longer exist. A voice they recognize instantly. A parent, a partner, a close friend, speaks softly through static, repeating only a few words, or simply breathing on the other end. And then, just as quickly as it appears, the connection fades. The number becomes unreachable. The call logs sometimes vanish, and nothing feels quite the same after. These experiences have a name: calls from the deceased. It is a phrase that sounds dramatic, almost cinematic, yet it quietly sits in countless stories shared across decades. Some people speak of these calls as comforting moments, as if someone they loved found a final way to say goodbye. Others describe them as unsettling, impossible, or deeply puzzling events that linger in the mind long after the phone stops ringing. Of course, in our digital age, technology glitches happen all the time. Signals cross, data gets stuck, and devices behave in ways we do not fully understand. But what makes these stories so captivating is how personal they are, how specific the voices, the messages, and the timing can be. So tonight, we are stepping into that thin space where logic meets something harder to define. A space shaped by memory, emotion, and the strange ways technology sometimes echoes with more than just electricity. For as long as telephones have existed, people have quietly shared stories of calls that seem to come from someone no longer alive. These accounts stretch back to the earliest days of wired communication, when operators manually connected lines and communities relied on rotary phones. Newspapers from the mid-20th century occasionally mentioned strange incidents, late-night rings, voices that sounded faint or distant, or calls traced to numbers that had been disconnected for weeks. As technology evolved, the stories did not disappear. They simply adapted. In the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, families reported receiving messages on answering machines, sometimes long after the person who recorded them had passed away. A few cases described machines turning on by themselves, playing old recordings that no one remembered saving. Whether these were mechanical quirks or something more, they left a deep impression on the people who witnessed them. By the early 2000s, with mobile phones becoming universal, new versions of these stories surfaced. Some people claimed to get missed calls from numbers belonging to loved ones whose devices had already been turned off or destroyed. Others said they received short, fragmented messages, brief signals that could not be traced or explained. Even voicemail systems occasionally stored mysterious clips that seemed to appear without any sender. What stands out is not the technology itself, but the consistency of the experiences. Different decades, different devices, different cultures, yet the emotional atmosphere of these stories remains the same: surprise, confusion, a moment of disbelief, and then a lingering sense of wonder. Whether these accounts reflect random technical errors or something more symbolic, they have continued to appear generation after generation, forming a quiet thread of mystery woven into the history of communication. When people describe these unusual calls, certain details seem to repeat again and again, almost like a shared script that no one agreed upon. The first pattern is the timing. Most of these calls happen late at night or in the very early morning, when the world is quiet and the mind sits somewhere between alertness and reflection. That stillness makes every sound feel sharper, every moment a little more intense. Another pattern involves the audio quality. Many witnesses mention hearing a layer of static, as if the voice is traveling through a long and unstable distance. Sometimes the voice sounds normal but faint, and other times it is slow, monotone, or strangely emotionless. A few callers report hearing only breathing or a soft whisper that is not fully clear, just enough to spark recognition, yet never enough to provide certainty. The third pattern is the brevity. These calls rarely last long. The voice may speak only a few words, repeat the listener's name, or simply remain silent before the line disconnects. Attempts to call the number back usually fail. It rings once and stops, or the system reports that the number is no longer in service. In some cases, the call does not even appear in the phone's logs afterward, leaving the recipient even more puzzled. Despite the differences in location, culture, or technology, the emotional fingerprint of these calls tends to be the same, a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and an unshakable feeling that something unusual just happened. For some, it becomes a moment of comfort. For others, it becomes a memory they never fully understand. These repeated patterns, reported across decades, are part of what makes this phenomenon so compelling and so difficult to ignore. For many people who experience these unusual calls, the reaction goes far beyond simple surprise. It becomes an emotional moment that stays with them long after the phone stops ringing. The first feeling is often shock, an instinctive disbelief that comes from hearing a familiar voice tied to someone they have already said goodbye to. Even when the call lasts only a few seconds, that recognition hits instantly, like a memory suddenly waking up. After the initial surprise fades, the emotions begin to divide. For some individuals, the experience brings an unexpected sense of comfort. They describe the call as gentle, almost like a final check-in from someone they cared about. These people do not focus on the technical impossibility. Instead, they remember the warmth, the timing, or the feeling that the call arrived exactly when they needed it most. Others have a very different reaction. The moment can feel unsettling, precisely because it does not make logical sense. They replay the voice in their mind, question whether they imagined it, and sometimes stay awake for hours trying to understand what happened. A few people even avoid mentioning it to anyone else, worried that others won't believe them or will dismiss the experience as a misunderstanding. But in almost every case, these calls leave a lasting imprint. They appear in dreams, in conversations with family, or in quiet moments weeks later. Some people say the experience helped them through grief. Others say it created more questions than answers. And many simply accept it as something beyond explanation, a strange, fleeting moment that bridged memory, emotion, and the fragile nature of loss. No matter how each person interprets it, the emotional weight of these calls is undeniable. They are rare, brief, and deeply personal, and that is exactly why they linger. When trying to understand these unusual calls, many experts begin with the most grounded possibility: technology itself. Modern communication systems are incredibly complex, built on layers of signals, networks, servers, and data pathways that can behave unpredictably under certain conditions. Because of this, several explanations attempt to frame these events as rare but natural glitches within the system. One common theory involves signal errors. In older landline systems, crossed wires or faulty connections sometimes caused voices from unrelated calls to bleed into each other. Although this is far less common today, certain environmental or hardware issues can still create unexpected behavior in phone networks. Another explanation relates to delayed data. With digital communication, information does not always move instantly. Voicemail fragments, cached recordings, or old audio files can occasionally resurface after long periods, especially if a device or network is undergoing updates or disruptions. In these cases, a message may appear to come from the past, even though it is simply data re-emerging from storage. There is also the possibility of number recycling or spoofing, where a disconnected number may temporarily be reassigned or appear active due to system transitions. Combined with automated systems, this can create odd moments where a call seems to originate from an unexpected source. Modern smartphones add another layer: software glitches. Apps, call logs, and message databases sometimes behave unpredictably. A sudden reboot, corrupted file, or syncing issue can create phantom notifications or call records that do not match real activity. None of these explanations perfectly accounts for every story, but they offer a foundation for understanding how complex technology can occasionally produce strange, emotionally charged moments. And while these explanations may feel comforting to some, others believe they do not capture the full experience, opening the door to more mysterious interpretations. Beyond technology, some researchers turn to the human mind for answers. Grief, memory, and emotion are powerful forces, and they can shape the way we perceive the world more than we realize. When someone loses a person they deeply care about, their thoughts often circle back to that absence, sometimes in dreams, sometimes through recalled conversations, and sometimes in unexpected sensory moments. One well-known explanation is grief-related perception. During intense emotional periods, the mind can replay familiar voices with surprising clarity. A person might misinterpret a faint sound, a fragment of static, or even their own expectation as a recognizable voice. This does not mean the experience is not real to them. It simply means the brain may be filling in gaps with something deeply meaningful. Another possibility is memory association. Phones are tied to communication and connection. Hearing a ringtone or a vibration pattern once linked to someone who has passed away can trigger a strong emotional response. In this vulnerable moment, the mind may momentarily blend memory with present experience, creating the impression of a call that feels personal and intentional. Some psychologists also mention heightened sensitivity during loss. When a person is processing intense emotions, they often become more aware of small details, sounds, lights, or subtle cues they would normally ignore. This state can make ordinary glitches or notifications seem unusual or symbolic. Then there is the need for closure. People naturally seek meaning during difficult transitions. A brief, unexplained event, like a strange ring or a flicker on a screen, can feel like a final message, especially if the timing aligns with a moment of longing or reflection. These explanations do not dismiss the experience. Instead, they highlight how deeply the mind interacts with memory and emotion. For many, the value of these moments lies not in whether they can be proven, but in how they help someone navigate loss. While science offers grounded explanations, many people feel that these unusual calls carry a meaning that goes beyond technology or psychology. In countless stories shared across different cultures, the idea that someone who has passed away might reach out one last time is not seen as impossible. It is seen as a continuation of connection. For them, these calls are not errors or illusions. They are messages. Some believe that energy does not disappear, and that the emotions we carry, love, longing, unfinished conversations, can find a way to express themselves even after someone's physical presence is gone. In this view, technology becomes a tool that can be influenced or touched by subtle forces we do not yet understand. A phone line, a voicemail system, or even a digital signal becomes a bridge between two worlds. There are stories of people receiving calls at meaningful moments, anniversaries, birthdays, or times of emotional distress. The voice is often brief, gentle, or simply silent, as if the purpose of the call is not to deliver information but to send reassurance. These experiences are deeply personal, and for many individuals, they feel too specific to be dismissed as coincidence. Others interpret these events as symbolic communication, not a literal phone call from the other side, but a moment when memory, timing, and emotional resonance line up so perfectly that it feels like a message. Whether the voice is heard clearly or felt intuitively, the experience leaves an impression of presence rather than absence. Of course, there is no universal agreement on what these moments truly represent. But for many who experience them, the details do not matter as much as the feeling. A brief sense of connection that seems to transcend distance, time, and even the boundary between life and memory. Among the many stories shared over the years, a handful of accounts have become widely known because of how specific, detailed, and emotionally striking they are. These cases do not rely on dramatic claims. Instead, they stand out because the people involved were ordinary individuals who described experiences they could not easily explain. One of the most referenced examples comes from the mid-20th century, when a woman reported receiving a phone call from her husband shortly after his passing. The voice on the line sounded distant, but unmistakably familiar. He simply said her name, paused, and then the call ended. What made the story compelling was that the number displayed had already been disconnected days earlier. Another well-known account involves an answering machine in the 1,980 seconds. After a close family member passed away, the machine recorded a new message late one night. The voice was soft, full of static, and repeated a simple phrase that only the family understood. No one else had access to the home or the device, and the timestamp did not align with any known call. More recent cases include people receiving brief text notifications or missed calls from numbers associated with loved ones who were no longer alive. In several instances, the phones belonging to those loved ones had already been turned off or were no longer in use. These events created a sense of wonder and confusion, leaving families with questions they could not fully answer. What all of these stories have in common is not dramatic detail, but emotional weight. The timing feels meaningful. The messages are short but personal, and the people involved often describe the experience as something that felt deeply intentional, even if they can't explain how or why it happened. Whether these stories reflect coincidence, technology, or something beyond understanding, they continue to be shared because they resonate with a universal human longing, the desire for connection, even across impossible distances. Across the world, different cultures interpret these unusual calls in ways that reflect their own traditions, spiritual views, and emotional landscapes. While technology may be universal, the meaning people attach to unexplained communication varies widely depending on where they come from and what they believe about life and the afterlife. In many Asian cultures, for example, contact from someone who has passed away is often seen as a sign of care or protection. It may be interpreted as a loved one reaching out to reassure the living or to let them know they are at peace. Stories of subtle communication through dreams, symbols, or unexpected signals are common, so a mysterious call fits naturally into this worldview. In some Western traditions, these events are sometimes understood as unfinished connections. A brief voice or unexpected message may be seen as a final gesture, a way to say what was not said before, a way to bring comfort, or simply a moment of presence that continues the bond between two people. Other cultures hold more cautious interpretations. A few communities believe that unexpected contact from someone who has passed away could be a warning or reminder, a symbolic nudge to pay attention to something important in life. It is not viewed as frightening, but rather as a moment meant to inspire reflection. There are also cultures that approach these stories from a philosophical perspective. Instead of viewing the calls as literal communication, they see them as expressions of memory, emotion, or spiritual energy manifesting through a familiar medium. What is striking is that, despite differences in belief, these events almost always point toward connection rather than fear. They reflect the deep human desire to stay linked with those we have loved, and the many ways different societies find meaning in the mysteries that surround loss and remembrance. When it comes to these mysterious calls, the divide between skeptics and believers is surprisingly wide and surprisingly passionate. Each side approaches the phenomenon from a completely different angle, shaped by personal experience, worldview, and the meaning they attach to unexplained events. Skeptics tend to focus on logic and system behavior. To them, every odd call must have a technical explanation, even if that explanation is not immediately obvious. They point to network errors, delayed data packets, software bugs, or interference from nearby devices. From their perspective, communication systems are far from perfect, and rare glitches can easily create moments that feel strange or personal. Their argument is simple. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Believers, however, view these events through a more emotional and intuitive lens. They argue that not everything meaningful can be measured or cataloged. When someone hears a familiar voice at a crucial moment, especially a voice tied to deep memories or unfinished emotions, they feel it cannot be reduced to a technical hiccup. Many believe the timing of these calls is too precise, too personal, or too comforting to be dismissed as random error. Between these two extremes lies a quiet middle ground. Some people feel both perspectives can be true, at the same time that unexplained calls might be rare intersections of technology, memory, and something more intangible. They do not insist on a supernatural explanation, but they also do not dismiss the profound emotional impact these experiences can have. What makes this debate so enduring is that neither side can fully prove or disprove the other. The phenomenon sits in a gray area where logic and emotion collide, leaving enough space for doubt, wonder, and ongoing conversation. And in that space, people continue to share their stories, seeking understanding, connection, or simply someone willing to listen. Even in an age of advanced smartphones, encrypted messaging apps, and cloud-based communication, stories of mysterious calls have not faded away. In fact, some argue they have become even more intriguing. With today's technology being far more stable than the old analog systems, unexpected messages or calls feel less like technical slip-ups and more like puzzles that do not quite fit into what we know. Many modern accounts involve missed calls from numbers that no longer exist. People report seeing a familiar contact flash briefly on their screen, often someone who has already passed away. When they try to return the call, the number does not connect. Sometimes it rings once, then stops. Other times, the phone immediately reports the number as inactive. There are also stories about short, fragmented voicemails appearing without any incoming call registered. These clips often contain static, distant breathing, or a single word that sounds familiar but unclear. Because voicemail servers run through multiple layers of digital systems, these moments are difficult to trace, making them even more mysterious. Text-based experiences have also emerged. A few people say they have received brief messages, usually just 1 or 2 words, from contacts whose devices were no longer in service. Whether these are delayed transmissions, database errors, or something else entirely remains unknown. What stands out about modern cases is their timing. Many people report these events happening on meaningful dates, a birthday, an anniversary, or the day they were thinking intensely about the person they lost. It is this emotional alignment that makes the experiences feel intentional, even when the technology behind them remains unexplained. In a world filled with digital noise, these brief and quiet moments stand out. They remind people that even with all our advancements, there are still corners of our communication systems and our emotional lives that resist simple explanations. After more than a century of shared stories, shifting technologies, and countless attempts to explain them, these unusual calls remain one of those rare mysteries that sit quietly between certainty and wonder. No single explanation, technical, psychological, or spiritual, can fully account for every detail. And maybe that is why the phenomenon continues to capture people's attention. For some, the unresolved nature of these calls is a source of comfort. They see them as gentle reminders that connection does not simply disappear. Even if the experience can't be documented scientifically, the feeling it leaves behind matters just as deeply. These individuals hold on to the idea that love, memory, and emotion can echo in unexpected ways. For others, not knowing is unsettling. They prefer clear answers, solid facts, and predictable systems. In their view, any unexplained communication must be the result of a glitch or a rare but natural occurrence in our complex digital networks. The ambiguity does not inspire wonder. It sparks curiosity and a desire to understand the mechanics behind it. Yet the phenomenon persists precisely because it resists being placed neatly into one category. Technology can explain part of it, but not all. Psychology fills in some gaps, but not every pattern. And spiritual interpretations offer meaning, but not universal agreement. Ultimately, these calls remind us of something deeply human: our need to stay connected, our longing to understand what happens after loss, and our instinct to search for signs in quiet, unexpected moments. Whether these experiences are coincidences, emotional echoes, or something beyond our current understanding, they continue to live in stories passed from one person to another. And maybe the mystery endures because it asks a question everyone can feel, even if no one can answer it fully. What if connection does not end where we think it does? As we step back from these stories, one thing becomes clear: mysterious calls from those who have passed away are less about phones and signals and more about the human experience itself. They sit at a crossroads where memory, technology, emotion, and belief quietly overlap. Whether someone interprets these moments as glitches, symbols, or heartfelt messages, the impact is real, and it lingers long after the sound fades. What makes this phenomenon so compelling is that it does not demand a single explanation. Instead, it invites us to pause and consider how complex connection can be. Even in a world filled with data, wires, and digital noise, there are still moments that feel deeply personal, moments that remind us of the people who shaped our lives. Maybe that is why these stories continue to surface across decades and cultures. They reflect something universal, something human, something that sits beyond simple logic. And perhaps the real value of these experiences is not in proving what they are, but in acknowledging what they mean. A reminder of love, a spark of memory, a whisper of comfort when it is needed most. Sometimes the mystery itself becomes the message. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, and for walking through this quiet, haunting, but strangely beautiful corner of our modern world. Whether you are here out of curiosity, comfort, or just a love for a good mystery, I am glad you joined me. Take care, rest well, and may your night be peaceful. We will meet again in the next story.